Hello and welcome to The Price of Time, the show where we explore the defining moments that made people who they are today and the impact of those moments over time. Here's your host, Luke Tatum. Hello once again and welcome back to The Price of Time. Thank you so much for joining us again today. Today's guest is Jeffrey Deskovic, Esquire, founder and director of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Luke.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to talk to you. It sounds like you have just a crazy, unbelievable story to tell, and I don't know basically any of it yet. So I'm really excited to kind of learn from you. It sounds like you've had some public speaking engagements in the past. You've got a whole history, and I'm just really not familiar with any of it. And so I can't wait, to get into it. If you would just sort of start with, what is your defining moment? I know we had to kind of choose from a menu of a few different major things in your life. So what is the one defining moment we're going to hone in on today?
I was in Sing Sing Correctional Facility. I was in the 16th year of wrongful imprisonment. And I was sitting in a chair right up against the bars and literally holding on to the cell bars and just thinking wistfully. This thought came through my head, man, if I ever get out of here, if this ever gets straightened out, I'm going to become a lawyer and I'm going to help free other people who are in the same position that I'm in, which is wrongfully imprisoned. But it was kind of a wistful thought, somewhat analogous to, whistle in the dark as you walk through a cemetery, pretending that you're not afraid, but you actually are. Didn't seem like there was, if you pardon my French, it didn't seem like there was any way in hell that was going to happen. It was nothing but just a wistful moment.
Yeah, sure. Well, and like I said at the beginning, I don't know the story, so I know you were wrongfully convicted, but what was that? I mean, what was the situation? What were you wrongfully convicted of, and how did that all happen?
Sure. So I was wrongfully convicted the case happened in New York, specifically in Westchester County. So it's a suburb. And I was 16 when I was arrested. I turned 17 by the time the trial for the murder and rape took place. It was of a high school classmate that I barely knew. I got on the police radar because in high school I was quiet and to myself, and some of the cops interviewed the students in the high school, and the students said, "Well, you might want to talk to Jeff," because I didn't quite fit in. I was a sensitive teenager, so I had an emotional reaction, and the cops thought that was suspicious, given that I barely knew the victim, and they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that, so it was a reinforcing factor. And so for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they talked to me like I'm a suspect, and I would become nervous and frightened, and I'd want to get away from them, and they would switch it up. And Jeff, as this junior detective helper theme was developed by them, so they had me thinking that I was there helping them when actually I was the target of their investigation. And ultimately, on a school day, they drove me out of county, and they delivered me into the hands of a polygraphist, where over the course of 6.5 to 7 hours, I was interrogated using third-degree tactics and threats and false promises, the polygraph, and ultimately they secured a coerced false confession from me, and that was the basis of the arrest. The DNA didn't match me before the trial, but the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, to commit perjury. He claimed, well, I forgot to document medical findings which showed that the victim was promiscuous, and he made that up to help the prosecutor get around the DNA not matching me, going so far as to mention somebody by name that he claimed slept with the victim, and never supporting that. And that was how they kind of answered the DNA evidence, and I lost the trial based on that coerced false confession and prosecutorial misconduct and fraud by the medical examiner. My public defender essentially didn't defend me. He didn't interviewer called as a witness my alibi. He never explained the DNA not matching me. He never used that to challenge the confession. Sometimes he told the jury the confession never happened. Other times he said that it did happen, but it was coerced. And other times he was arguing that, that it was a false confession. He wouldn't allow me to testify. And ultimately I was wrongfully convicted. And I was given a 15 to life sentence, and I spent 16 years in prison from age 17 to 32 before finally being exonerated through additional DNA testing through the data bank, which not only affirmed that it wasn't me, but also identified the actual perpetrator, whose DNA was only there because left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed a second victim 3.5 years later after killing the victim in my case. So ultimately, all charges were dismissed against me on actual innocence grounds, and he was subsequently arrested.
That is a crazy story, Jeff. I mean, what was going through your mind? I mean, if you even recall at this point, I guess you probably do. But when you were, I guess, when did it click for you that, hey, they're throwing me in prison for this? I mean, I'm not helping them out after all. They're working me over.
Well, yeah. Well, right. Well, that dawned on me after I was arrested. So, that one of the lies they told me was that, just tell them what they want to hear. You're going to go home afterwards and you won't be arrested. So I made up the story. I falsely confessed. I suppose in hindsight, that's when I was actually arrested, but I didn't realize that was the moment that I was arrested. I mean, they put me in handcuffs and put me in a car, brought me back to the police station. But when I asked them, well, why are you putting me in handcuffs? You told me I wasn't going to be arrested. The lieutenant just said safety. And then they brought me back to the police station, and they said that, we were going to have pizza at the police station. And so I'm eating pizza afterwards. And periodically I'm interrupted by a uniformed police officer who's carrying out different aspects of the processing. And finally he puts ink on my fingers and does the fingerprints. And I remember I got rather angry, and I looked around, and, I saw one of the detectives, the one who had played the bad cop. And I said, what is he? I said to him angrily, why is he doing this? Why is he putting ink on my fingers? I mean, I'm over here trying to eat pizza. Right. And he said, oh, he has a right to do that. And I said, well, what do you mean he's got a right to do that? I was told I wasn't being arrested, and he said, oh, you are being charged with the crime. And so at that moment, it kind of all dawned on me that I had been arrested. But at some point after that, through numerous conversations with my immediate and extended family, I mean, everybody kind of believed in the system. So they all talked me into thinking that I was going to be found not guilty because I was innocent. And so I believed that all the way up until the point at which I was found guilty.
It's one of those, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear kind of things, basically. You've heard that line before,
Yeah, I've heard that line before. Yeah, it was some of that. And most people, most of us think that the justice system works. If we hear that someone's been arrested, we automatically assume that they're guilty. And, if you find yourself on trial, you don't think, the idea of being convicted of something you didn't do never really dawns on you. I mean, as a society, if someone is found guilty after trial, it's kind of a normal thought, I think, or frequently occurring thought. Well, they must have committed the crime because you wouldn't have been found guilty. So I never, the thought of a wrongful conviction never even really crossed my mind. I mean, the first 3 charges that were read off, a jury found me not guilty. And then finally they said guilty. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Did I just hear that right? Did I like miss the word not in the front? They couldn't have just said that, right? And then I hear the next guilty verdict read off, and the next one guilty. And I was just kind of like in a stunned stupor. And I really didn't know, what the hell was going to happen next.
Right. And so you were in there for, you said 16 years?
I was yes. So I was in for 16 years. Yeah. So, I mean, I had 7 appeals. That was kind of that was, I mean, it's kind of hard not to have hope to, you're surviving to just to survive something like that. And then, I don't really think of it like I'm doing a 15 to life sentence. I thought, well, I just have to hold on for a year or two until the next appeal will be decided, which I'm sure I'm going to win because I'm innocent and I still believed in the system. And then when I would lose, I mean, the crash back down to earth would be, loud and hard. But at some point, within a couple of weeks to a couple of months, you kind of pick yourself back up and now you reorient yourself to the next appeal. And so that happened to me 7 times, and, at that point, when my appeals were over, I was, permanently locked out of the courthouse unless you can find some new evidence. So I began writing letters, for lawyers and nonprofits and faith-based organizations and pretty much anybody and everybody. If I could come up with a line of reasoning, how somebody could help me, even people that were not in the legal field, if there was some action that I could conceptualize that they could take that could set in motion a chain of events that I was hoping could culminate into my getting legal representation, I wrote the letter. So I did that for about 4 years. And then I went to the parole board, where largely because I maintained my innocence and, rather than expressing remorse and take responsibility, I got turned down for parole. So then I did another year after that. And, then I was ultimately exonerated in year 16.
Where was this moment that we started the conversation? You said that you had been in for a long time at that point. So how?
It was in my 16th. Yes, it was in my 16th year. And, and I had just been, transferred from Elmira Correctional Facility, which is where I spent the bulk of my time. I had just been transferred from there to Sing Sing, which ironically was in Westchester. It's in the same county as Peekskill, where all this, it's in the same county as where all this happened. I mean, I had actually visited the town of Ossining, which is where Sing Sing is located at. I mean, I had traveled through and visited Ossining a number of times long before I had any, involvement in the justice system through this false arrest. So, the irony of that wasn't really lost on me.
And so what year did you get to walk free?
In year 16.
But what calendar year? What?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, 2006. Yeah, it was September 20th, 2006.
Okay. So it's been some time. So you've been out.
It's been 18 years. I've been home for 18 years now. Yeah. Yes.
And what was going through your mind when you finally got to step out of there? I mean, the final paperwork was, processed. You're finally out.
Okay. So the day before I was released, suddenly I was, so when the guards open up your cell, because if you're not at the prison assignment in the morning or the afternoon, when you're not at recreation, you're in your cell. That's the default place where you are. Okay. And so if the guards open up your cell, you're supposed to come out of the cell and either stick your head down the gallery and, with the officers there so you can see what they opened your cell door up. And if they're not there, you're supposed to walk down to the end to talk to them to see, why did they let you out? So I walked down there. The guard yelled down. He says, "Visit!" So I walked down there and I had him call up the visiting room to double check because I wasn't planning on a visit. And it's happened a few times that they've made an error and let the wrong person out to go down to the. So I didn't want that to happen to me. Okay. So he double checked and confirmed, yeah, I had a visit. So I remember running back to my cell and I put on like a visiting room shirt. Like they gave us like one white shirt, and so people would. This was our one time where we really come in contact with society in the visiting room. So people have a visiting shirt. You wouldn't want to be in your prison uniform shirt on the visiting room in public. So as I'm running down there, buttoning up the shirt, and I'm thinking to myself, who the hell came to see me? And I'm hurrying up, and I finally get in there. And when I get in there, this lady is waving like this to me, and I think, well, she's confusing me with somebody, but either she's confusing me with somebody or else she remembers me maybe from a different prison. So I wave back and I asked the guard, well, who came to see me? And she pointed to the lady, and then she said, well, don't you know who came to see you? So I just said, yeah, of course I do. which I'm lying to her. I don't want the visit to be, I don't want there to be an inquiry, and the end result of it all is the damn visit's canceled. That's the last thing I want to have happen, right? So I walk up to this lady, and she introduces herself. She mentions her name's Nina Morrison. That's just my lawyer at the Innocence Project. And then she says, DNA test results are in, right? And, you know, my ears are up. I'm looking for the slightest sign that anything has gone wrong, you know, because I've been derailed by glitches before. Like earlier in the process, my paperwork arrived late 4 days in the courtroom because the court clerk told my lawyer the wrong information, and my being late was the only thing the court was concerned with. And so I lost based on that in one of my appeals. And, you know, then that ruling was upheld by 3 more courts, you know. So I'm on the lookout for the slightest, anything being out of the ordinary, because that normally spells disaster. And so I said to her, well, what do you mean the items have been tested? They're not supposed to be tested for another month. And she says, no, the district attorney got the lab to speed up the testing, and the results match the actual perpetrator. You're going home tomorrow. And I said, no, I'm not. And we went back and forth a couple times, and then my head started spinning, and I had this 3.5-hour mental paralysis where all these thoughts were coming through my mind, one thought after another. One thought had nothing to do with the other. None of them had anything to do with going home. And I'm articulating out loud and saying that every now and then she would cut in and say, are you ready to talk about tomorrow? I mean, no. We're not talking about tomorrow. I'm not entertaining that. I'm not going home. Don't play with me like that. I've long since given up any type of hope, because if you hope, then you can be hurt. And I couldn't be hurt yet again because it had happened too often already. So finally, what made it real at the end is she said, look, the visiting hours are almost over. You know, there's a ton of work to do with the media. I got to get your clothing size, your shoe size. And that really is what really made it real. And I felt better for 5 minutes. And then a different concern came in my head. I thought, well, something's going to happen between today and tomorrow, and they're going to change their mind and do what they always do, which is fight against me and win.
Gosh. And so getting out, I mean, so I guess it went okay, right? The next day
It went okay. Yeah, I was driven from Sing Sing, you know, in Ossining to the county courthouse in White Plains, and, you know, everything went like it was supposed to. I mean, you know, the district attorney's office had agreed with the defense that, you know, that the conviction should be overturned. So both sides said the same thing, and the judge, you know, overturned the conviction. And it felt to me like he just ran in the courtroom and, you know, heard both sides and just ran the hell out, like he really didn't want to have anything to do with this, but that he was basically forced into it, being the lone man on the totem pole. So I got up to leave, and then kind of the enormity of the moment hit me, and I sat back down, and my lawyers are speaking to me, and, you know, I'm hearing them and not hearing them. And, you know, eventually they cleared the whole courthouse out, and I got up, and finally at the end, and as I took one step after the other, walking my way towards the courtroom door, and nobody stopped me. And so it got more and more real as each step that I took. And I remember there was a tall bailiff there, and, you know, she was trying to be stoic and professional, but I could see the water was running. And so I looked up at her, and, you know, we locked eyes for a second, and I said, thank you. And, you know, I walked out, and I remember when I went outside, it was a blue sky. I didn't see any clouds out there. The sun was out. Everyone was, you know, clapping and cheering, you know, people from the Innocence Project and Cardozo Law School, the students of which work at the interns, and then, you know, members of my extended family. And went to the press conference, and it was my time to speak. I finally said, is this really happening?
Yeah.
I felt like I finally did it. I felt like I finally managed to lose my mind. And so I'm in this elaborate delusion that's so good that it's fooling me.
Right.
But I'm going to come to. I'm going to, regain my faculties, and I'm still going to be on the prison bed with the walls around me and the prison bars and, the guards and the keys and the barbed wire and the long wall. And, it's all going to continue on, man.
Did you have a culture shock whenever you got out? Like, people's
Did.
phones being different now and, all that kind of stuff?
Yes, yeah. So good quick anecdotal story. So we were at the celebratory luncheon, and my lawyer says, "Look, there's a reporter that would like to talk to you on the phone. He wasn't able to make it to the press conference. Would you speak to him on the phone?" So he hands me his cell phone, and I remember I said to him, "Where are the holes on the phone to speak into?"
Yeah.
But aside from that, I mean, GPS, cell phones, internet, these things hadn't been created before. Culture was different. Buildings, houses, and other structures were different, although there was enough of the old structures there, just enough to make it feel like I was in a parallel world.
Right. You try to go places that you remembered and they weren't there or had been different. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. That's crazy. I mean, it's a stereotype to some extent, with people who have been in, the system for a long period of time. And so I've seen that portrayed in media before, but I've never really got to explore that with someone that's been in that situation. So that's crazy. Now, okay, so you get out. You had help from the Innocence Project, is what you called it. I don't know anything about them. So how did that? That was one of the letters you wrote, I suppose, that you reached out to them.
Yeah, it is. Back up half a step. When I was writing letters to anyone and everyone, I wrote a letter to a book author in care of the publishing company. And so when at the publishing company instead sent it to an investigator, this investigator suggested I write the Innocence Project, which is how I came to write them. And then she lobbied them from outside the organization to take my case. So the Innocence Project is a nonprofit organization that frees wrongfully convicted prisoners across the country in cases where DNA testing can potentially demonstrate innocence.
Is that what inspired you to start your foundation?
It is. It is. Yes. So, I mean, they've exonerated more than 250 people. And so, I started my own organization, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, with the same goal as a mission as them, following a lot of the lessons and way that they do things. But the main difference between the two entities being that they only take cases where DNA testing is a possibility. So that's only 10% of all serious felony cases. And I felt strongly that if there's a way to exonerate somebody, then that should be done, regardless of whether that is going to involve DNA or not.
And now, are you the one that's deciding what cases to take and which ones not to? Or I guess, how does your foundation work, if you don't mind?
I don't mind. So I have like 3 case analysts. So the process is the applicants contact me. So I have like a part-time office administrator that answers the letters, that sends questionnaires out and asks for certain legal documents, not everything, just the materials we need to do the analysis. So that gets sent back to us by the applicants. The administrator scans everything, and then the file is then sent electronically to one of the 3 case analysts. And they read all the original source material that we've collected. They fill out a form that I've developed. And so they send that to me, and that allows me to wrap my head around the case without having to read all the original stuff. And so in the first place, they're trying to be a reporter. I mean, just keep your opinion out of it. Just let me know what's actually there. And then there's usually 2 or 3 times, so I've read hundreds of cases that have ended in exoneration. So I know what the routes and tactics and techniques have been that have worked before. So I'm usually able to, ask 2 or 3 different things, and, they would know whether something is a possibility or not. And so they go back, and eventually run those things down, come back to me, and maybe we do that once or twice more. Once there's nothing else left to turn up, then they're allowed to be a columnist, and then we think critically. We ask ourselves two questions: do we believe in the innocence claim, and what is the potential route of investigation? And so we decide. We decide that whether to accept or reject the case, they have to persuade me or I have to persuade them. Only when there's a consensus either on acceptance or rejection. So, I mean, the facts of a case are what might convince us that somebody, is innocent, but that's not the way that you're going to win the case. The court's not going to allow you to relitigate the case based on what's there already. You have to find something new that wasn't known that probably would have made a difference. So when you identify what those lines of inquiry or investigation are, and that's basically what you're betting on, so to put some color to it, we might look for alternative suspects or a similar crime in a nearby area, or maybe a witness has bubbled to the surface that wasn't around before, or if we think that somebody didn't tell the truth previously, we might re-interview them. We might file a Freedom of Information request, and sometimes documents that have been buried before suddenly come to light, and that could furnish a new investigative lead. Certainly, if any of the people involved in the case have misconduct that's bubbled to the surface in some other unrelated case, that's another route to go to. And that's really in a non-DNA case. I mean, in a DNA case, if there's something to test, if there's seminal fluid, blood, hair, saliva, some clothing item that the perpetrator is said to have sweated into, then it's kind of a no-brainer. And if there's any experts, were they all properly credentialed? Did any of them go outside their area of expertise? Is it actually a science? Is it a junk science that's been used instead that sounds like it's scientific, but is not? So these are all the inquiries. So we ask ourselves, well, if all these things broke right, would that be enough to win? And and what are the odds that it would break right? And what is the amount of time and money that it would take to actually run all these things down in the field? So only after all of that, do we then decide by consensus whether to accept the case or close the case.
So it's a lot of work,
and
a lot of upfront work.
It's a lot of right. But that's all before the actual field investigation work takes place, and getting affidavits and then drafting legal documents and legal research and writing and putting stuff in the court. Yeah. That's all before the actual work gets started.
Is that difficult for you as someone who's been through that process? Like, does this dig up memories that you'd rather not go back into? Yeah.
Yeah, of course it does. But there's no way to avoid it other than not doing the work. And I'm not about to not do the work. So the way that it usually works out is, I can look back in hindsight. I mean, normally in the moment, I'm trying to argue why we shouldn't close something, and they're trying to convince me of why they should. And, when I can't persuade them, and then we close. But I mean, I come to see what, really what they were saying. And, that's kind of one way of, protecting, because you're not going to exonerate somebody that's not innocent. You're not going to find anything new in the field on behalf of somebody that's guilty. So, it would be a waste. Remember, the burden of proof shifts. When you've been found guilty, it's up to you to prove you're innocent. It's up to you to prove there's enough newly discovered evidence that probably would have led to a different outcome. So it's a hard thing to do. And, you don't want to spin your wheels and waste your time and resources trying to free somebody that's guilty, when you could be spending that time and money at trying to free someone that's actually innocent and, making some progress.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how big of a problem is this, Jeff? I mean, do you have figures or ballpark numbers for how many people are wrongfully convicted serving right now in a prison?
Well, you can't actually count. You can't count the wrongfully convicted people, but you can only count the exonerations, because if you can't tell who's right. So all that having been said, nationally from 1989 forward, per the National Registry of Exoneration, there have been 3,518 people that have been exonerated. In New York, where I'm from, there have been 349 exonerations. So obviously all of those people were wrongfully convicted prior to being exonerated. So I consider this to be a really big problem. It happens a lot more frequently than what most of us think. I mean, I think personally that the wrongful conviction rate is maybe 15 to 20%. I mean, that's, it seems like there's a couple of exonerations every week. And every time there's a rogue forensic scientist, hundreds, if not thousands of cases are discovered. The same thing with a rogue law enforcement, or you get a different district attorney who's elected, who has a real conviction review unit. I mean, I look at Brooklyn when Ken Thompson became the Brooklyn DA, and 23 people were exonerated in 2.5 years. And in Philadelphia, with DA Krasner's become the DA, they're in their 20s now in terms of the number of people exonerated. You could never get that type of number from, working in the nonprofit sphere or outside law firm. But my point of all of that is I'm saying that that's all part of what goes into my calculus. Now most of the other experts, may say 5% or 2.5% or 1% or 0.5%. I mean, I think that those are low. But even if you do accept those figures, if you think about the more than 2 million people enmeshed in the justice system, I mean, that's still a lot of people.
Right. It definitely is. Now, how long has your foundation been around, Jeff?
Yeah, depending on what you want to use as the demarcation of the beginning. Do you want to count when we opened up our doors? That would be 2011. You want to count when we got recognized by the IRS and were working out of somebody's living room? That would have been 2009. So it's your world, whatever you want to think.
I mean, both numbers are good. That's fine. So, and what has your experience been with that? Has it been a success, would you say? I mean,
I think it's been a success. We've been able to free 14 people so far.
Wow.
And we helped to pass 3 laws, and then another 6 working through a national coalition group called It Can Happen to You. Helped pass another 6. So currently we have 13 cases that we're working on, and we're pursuing policy changes in New York, Pennsylvania, and California. So in New York, we were able to pass country's first oversight commission on prosecutors. It's called Commission on Prosecutor Conduct. So we're trying to export that to California. And, because normally if New York and California pass the same law, generally speaking, the rest of the country follows. So that's our, theory there. In Pennsylvania, one of 12 states that does not currently compensate people who've been exonerated. So hence.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, compensation. So is that something New York does?
Yes, New York does compensate. Yes. So we're working on that. And then in terms of New York, we're working on bills that would curtail false confessions. I mean, false confessions cause wrongful convictions in 29% of the DNA-proven wrongful convictions. It certainly was how the police arrested me, so I know all about that. So we're working on. So New York, the cops are required to record custodial interrogations, but unfortunately, there's exceptions for homicide, sex offenses, drug cases, and so we're trying to get rid of those exceptions. We're trying to make mandatory that even non-custodial interrogations are recorded. There's what's called the police deception bill, which would ban law enforcement from lying to suspects in the course of interrogation. Most people are not aware that the law enforcement is allowed to lie to you, and that's inherently coercive. And lastly, we want another bill is called the Youth Interrogation Act, which would give 16, 17-year-olds, kids younger than that, a non-waivable right to counsel. So they would have to speak to the police to have their rights explained to them before they could decide if they want to waive them or not, keeping in mind that most kids don't understand their rights. I never understood when they read me my Miranda warnings when they said anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. I mean, my mind went to what I saw on television and, different civil court contexts. And I would think, court, what are you talking about? We're not going to court.
Right. Well, and I mean, most adults don't understand their rights, and that's a problem that affects everyone, but especially kids. I mean, you mentioned emotional, your emotional reaction and kind of not being even necessarily mentally there, right? I mean, you're thinking about the worst case scenario, what the heck is going on, and so you're not necessarily making a rational, even keeled decision when you're 13, 14, 15, when something like that is going on. It's crazy.
Yes, yeah, and while adults have given coerced false confessions, as you correctly point out, I mean, particularly vulnerable populations, youth. Innocence of suspects often works against them. They think, well, if I haven't done anything, I don't know anything, then, you know, why shouldn't I speak? Why shouldn't I waive my rights and speak to the police? What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly happen? And actually, quite a bit. And thoughts, well, if I ask for a lawyer, then I'm definitely going to look guilty. I mean, so all these thoughts go through people's minds. But no, it's very important not to waive your rights to ask for a lawyer. Don't let them talk you out of that. And once they provide you with a lawyer, then any conversation that needs to take place can, take place with the lawyer present. And the lawyer will make sure that you don't get coerced, and they don't engage in threats or false promises, things that they're not supposed to do anyway, but unfortunately sometimes do.
Yeah, I mean, ostensibly you had legal representation, right? But wasn't necessarily acting, to your benefit.
Well, yeah, at the trial it was, yeah, not in interrogation process. Yeah, well, see, my lawyer rarely visited with me. This is common, unfortunately. The lawyer very rarely met with me, and when he did, I try to explain I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, but he was always shutting me up. I mean, he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent.
Great. Yeah.
Makes a difference to me. Yeah. That's for the confidence for me there. And as I mentioned, he didn't explain to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. And I never used that to argue that that proved the confession was coerced and false. And, he just threw stuff against the wall in terms of addressing the confession. He literally asked no questions at all of the medical examiner, and he should have never represented me because of a conflict. So this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender agency, and specifically by the lawyer who's supposed to supervise him. In my case, that conflict prevented the defense from asking him to give a DNA sample. It prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. Never interviewed my alibi witness, never presented that to the court.
Just layers and layers of problems, Jeff. I mean, that's crazy.
Exactly. Yeah. And lastly, another common thing, he wouldn't let me take the stand either. I mean, a lot of people that their lawyers tell them don't take the witness stand, and he said, "Oh, it's not my job to prove you're innocent. They have to prove you're guilty. I don't think that that's happened." It's a legal principle, but it's a very naive way to practice law. That's not how it really goes down in the courtroom, especially if it's a confession case. I mean, you got to answer that confession. You have to explain that confession. You have to disprove it, bring it all together in your bring it all together in your closing remarks. I mean, otherwise there's a good chance the jury is going to find you guilty.
Right. Now we started out this conversation talking about your decision while you were behind bars to become a lawyer. And that seemed like an insurmountable goal you were never going to reach. You didn't know you were going to be, a free man. And so how did that happen? I mean, when did you become an attorney? A lawyer. And when did, I guess, give me the meat on that. I don't know the details,
Sure. All right. So at the press conference, which we described, I gave like a off the cuff 2.5 hour presentation, right? Everything I ever wanted to say and could ever get anyone to hear me. And I realized, well, look, I could do innocence work without necessarily being a lawyer. So for about 5 years, I speaking across the country, I was trading privacy for awareness by doing media interviews. I was regularly meeting with elected officials. I became a columnist for a weekly paper. But I wanted to be involved in freeing people. But really, the only thing I could do as an individual advocate was kind of nibble around the edges. So, like, I would allow a lawyer representing someone else to use my name in a press release, and I would show up in court for the visual. If the judge recognized me, the hope was, well, maybe they'll take a little bit closer look at that particular case. And I would pack the courtroom, and I would help try to get media attention because the idea is if the media is watching, sometimes that causes the judges to sweep things under the rug just a little bit less, So I'd gotten a scholarship from Mercy College, now Mercy University, to finish the bachelor's degree. So I did that, and after 5 years, I was compensated, and I wanted to not nibble on the edges anymore. I wanted to actually be more directly involved in freeing people. So I used some of the money to start the organization, and hence we got involved in trying to free people. Didn't get into law school, decided to get the master's degree with the hope the additional credential would help me be a more effective advocate. And at some point, I got tired of sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to sit at the defense table, represent some of the clients, make some of the arguments, hence deciding to go to law school. I mean, the key moment there, I guess a subsequent one to the bigger one that we spoke about was I was I was in the hallway at the Judicial Institute, and I was chit-chatting with one of the judges. And she, I was there. I just delivered a presentation to the judges on a wrongful conviction topic. And they asked me, well, why don't you know this material better than lawyers and better than some of the judges? That's why we've had you come and speak to us here. Why don't you just go get the piece of paper? Just go get the certificate. And that kind of ended the ongoing debate in my mind. So the debate was, look, do I just stop at the master's degree, leave it at that? Do I instead get a doctorate degree, or do I go to law school? And if I go to law school and take another shot at trying to become a lawyer, that's 3 hard years in law school, mostly studying legal topics that have nothing to do whatsoever with, doing criminal law and civil rights law, which is, involving, freeing people. But that kind of ended the debate. And I took the practice test, and I again got I took the test, and this time I got into law school.
So how many times have you been able to be the defense? I mean, since that's happened, I guess it's a shorter period of time, right? So the foundation was first, then you became a lawyer. And so how many cases have you been able to participate in?
So I've participated in 10. One of them resulted in a reversal. I was co-counsel, so I represented that person with a lead attorney and participated in the evidentiary hearing. And the other cases I'm working on, the case is still in process, and we've filed a bunch of legal paperwork for different people. We're seeking to exonerate them, and but the cases are ongoing still. So the end result of all of that is not known yet.
Okay, so tell me, I guess now what you're working on now that, I mean, I know you've got cases that you're juggling, but what else is on your radar? Do you have some other initiatives that you've got planned?
Well, again, the policy work that the policy change in New York, Pennsylvania, and California. We went over those earlier. I do have a strong secondary interest in some of the non-innocence justice reforms. Like, I think that, the parole system is broken as well. I mean, I saw a lot of people that went to the parole board and, they have bachelor's degrees and exemplary disciplinary record, have completed different vocational programs, therapeutic programs. And the only thing that ever seemed to matter when they went to the parole board was what they had been convicted of. And that's almost like a complete abandonment of any idea of a rehabilitation, a belief in a second chance. So definitely parole reform is definitely something something else on my radar. And I'm continuing to do speaking engagements and doing media. And, I'm hoping at some point to, get a literary agent for the book that's 95% done. I'd love to get the book published and, have it come out as a movie. There is a documentary short out about me, which is on Amazon Prime. It's called Conviction. That's like 21 minutes. It's a short. There's a longer 1.5-hour version, which is already shot and produced and directed. We're just looking for a distribution channel to release that. So I'm hoping that will be released soon, and continuing to try to raise money. So we really need to add additional lawyers, paralegals, investigators, other essential personnel, so we can work on freeing more people.
Now, how can people get involved, Jeff? I mean, where can they learn more about you? What's your links that you'd send people to learn more?
Sure. So first and foremost, our website, easy to remember, www.deskovic.org. That's Deskovic. Learn more about the organization there, learn more about me there. There is a web form that people can use to email. I'm also available on social media. There's Deskovic Foundation on Instagram. There's Jeffrey Deskovic on Facebook. There's both the personal profile, which is public, and there's the public figure page. And that's so that if I copy the content from one I share to the other, because it's more people that would like to keep up than what the friends list on the personal page allow. And of course, Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation is also has a Facebook page as well, so people can keep up there, as well as on LinkedIn.
Wonderful, wonderful. I will have all the links, all those things in the description for this video, so be sure to check that out. And is there anything that I didn't ask you today, Jeff, that you were hoping to get into and we just didn't quite get there?
Yeah, there's two things. My dream is to ultimately have a chapter, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, in each state, ultimately in each country. I really see this as a worldwide problem, not as a U.S. problem or even as a New York problem. I think countries where we don't hear about wrongful conviction, it's not because it doesn't happen. It's because nobody's getting freed, because nobody's working on it. So that'll be when we get the, public, financial public support. What if there was 25,000 people willing to sacrifice $3 to $5 a month on a recurring basis through our Patreon campaign? I mean, that would give close to $1 million. We could really work on getting a lot more people out. So I wanted to mention that. And the other thing I wanted to throw out there is, I've reflected on my life journey through time, both during the time of wrongful imprisonment and circumstances afterwards, because it hasn't all been like wonderful moments. I mean, my first 5 years of freedom were very difficult. I mean, I was released with nothing, and I was always passed over for gainful employment, so I lacked stability housing. At one point, I was a couple of weeks away from a homeless shelter. I mentioned the technology, the culture, the neighborhood. So there was that, the psychological after effects, and then the stigma, where you were in prison wrongfully for 16 years, but you were in prison for 16 years. So how much that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace? Just trying to have to rebuild a whole social life and try to rebuild relations with my immediate and extended family, the overwhelming majority of whom never came to see me. And the few that did, it was, sparingly few and far between. So all those things were a difficult process for me. Even I didn't get into law school the first time around. So I've thought about all of that stuff, and I've kind of come up with a universal formula, I think, which I would like to end on. So and it's not limited to wrongful conviction. Any difficult situation. I mean, you have a goal. You should have a realistic plan, meaning you should be able to look at it 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself, yeah, I can see how that might work, because who wants to carry out a plan if you do not think that the plan can work, right? You want to be flexible. Remember, the goal is the goal. The plan is not the goal. So if you have to alter the plan some along the way, then you do that. Don't be afraid of hard work. I'm not really a pie in the sky type person. I think that you have to work really hard to put yourself in a position for a miracle to occur, or the right person to show up at the right time, the right door to open for you. No excuses. There might be reasons why something is difficult or hard. No reason why you can't accomplish it. And lastly, never give up. And when you manage to cross that bridge, you got to reach back and help people in the same position you were in. And throughout the course of my 18 years of freedom, I mean, I've seen people carry that out. I've seen people carry that out that have faced discrimination or faced racism. I've been at an event where a woman who had previously been sexually trafficked now has a nonprofit designed to help free people that are, in the clutches of people that do sexual trafficking. I mean, I've come across women who are working to help with other women that are in, domestically abuse relationships. I've seen that. I've seen people working at homeless shelters that were homeless themselves. I've seen people that have had drug addictions that working with that population. I've seen people who've come back from prison that are working at assisting at-risk youth, the goal of trying to prevent them from ultimately being arrested and being incarcerated. So I know that all those situations, and even just someone that's, discriminated, I've mentioned those things. So I think it can apply across the board. So I would just encourage people to keep that formula in mind, and whatever difficulty you come across. And the idea of reaching back is such a powerful, transformative thing. And I think that it could definitely be healing and cathartic and make your suffering count for something. And so I kind of make sense of my life in that kaleidoscopic type of way. I'm doing the work that, I'm in the world for, and that's how I make sense of what happened to me. And with that acceptance, I have like a type of inner, excuse me, I have a type of inner peace with that.
No, that's wonderful. And I'm glad that you've been able to, take something that is so negative, and do positive work with that. But it's really, when I imagined this show, Jeff, I thought, this will be a whole bunch of interviews about, I read this really inspiring book, and then I was able to, transform my business life, and just kind of positive stories. And a lot of what has come out of this now has been just shockingly terrible things, but people have flipped it the other way.
Right.
And they've made positive changes because of that. And so it's been, more inspiring than I would have even thought it was going to be whenever I first came up with the show, So it's just a wonderful way to look at things. I like your formula a lot. And I hope that people will go to the description box below and check out your foundation, reach out, social media, all those things. Definitely look at those links. Thanks so much for your time today, Jeff. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to The Price of Time, hosted by Luke Tatum. Subscribe to us for more episodes. Check the description box below to learn more about our guest. And if you found this episode valuable, please share it with a friend.